Hey there, welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation.
Hello, Roxy.
Hello.
That was a weird start. We've been chit-chatting for a while before we started recording this. So we're excited to be back today for our next episode and kicking off January with another really good interview. We are going to be interviewing today Kate Morgan. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist, and she specializes just kind of in, like functional nutrition, integrative medicine, dietitian work. She focuses on gut health, microbiome, whole body health, nutrition counseling, perinatal care, gut health. I think I said that, metabolism, food sensitivities. This woman is brilliant and is just a wealth of knowledge. And we are super excited to have her on today. I think that everybody, just being able to, just super grateful to have these resources, especially people here local to us. And don't worry if you're not local, she works with people from all over. So just to have the opportunity to get to sit down with her, she's just amazing. So I thought I'd also give a little bit of backstory of how, we got hooked up with Kate, and I started working with her, goodness, maybe like a year ago. I was introduced to Kate at an event that I was at, and I thought to myself, this seems like somebody I need to get on my own health team. So even further backstory from that. So some of you, I've alluded to it or talked about it before on my social media or on here, but handful of years ago, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, and I have had a journey with my autoimmune kind of like chronic illness type of things. And early on, I, was doing things like the autoimmune protocol diet, which if you are familiar with that, it's a pretty restrictive diet, which has a very good purpose to it as to trying to decrease inflammation, find food sensitivities. But at the time, my personality was go big or go home, and I was going to be perfect with it. And you can imagine, and hopefully this resonates with a lot of other people, it became very much a very, very stressful time in my life. I was very afraid to eat certain things, and if I was going to ruin what I was doing. And this just drove my stress level up, which, the whole point of doing this and the whole, one of the biggest things when you have autoimmune diagnoses is to work on decreasing inflammation, which stress is a driver of that. And so it ended up backfiring on me, and I felt worse than I ever had before. And luckily I had a very good naturopathic doctor that I was working with that was like, okay, we need to stop, which was great. But because of that, I still had some disordered eating where I just wasn't sure at that point what I was supposed to do. I was cutting out gluten, but yet because I was in this adrenal fatigue state, I wanted carbs. And it was just this really weird time in my life where I didn't know exactly what to eat. I'd go swing from making really great food choices and eating really great to not. I knew that I needed some better guidance. And in came Kate to my life, which she has been amazing. And she came and met with me. And our first session was literally me basically just in tears, because I finally had somebody to talk to specifically about eating, and was able to lay out there, traveling was super stressful for me. Everybody would get to just go eat at a restaurant and pick whatever they wanted. And I was making sure that it was no dairy and no gluten and no pepper and no this. And so I had to undo a lot of, I don't know, now I don't really want to call it trauma, but a lot of thought patterns and be able to like come alive again and enjoy food again. And she said it the best at our first meeting. She said, we want your body to just feel safe again. And I was like, that is exactly right. So since then, that's kind of been my journey and working with her on actually taking time to eat. I know that this is a big thing for a lot of women, regardless of if you're, have kids or don't have kids, working, not working, all that stuff. We get going, and often we override our signals of if we're hungry and we just push past and relearning that like I need to stop and I need to nourish my body and I need to enjoy, like sit down and chew my food, like all the things. And don't get me wrong, I am not perfect by any means. I was joking the other day with my with April, our admin, that I had like a really stressful thing the other night. And then like right before bed, I like ate a Pop-Tart, which I told her, I was like, well, at least the Pop-Tart was like organic and from natural grocers or wherever it was. But like we're human and it doesn't have to be perfect. And ultimately, like it's really, at least for my journey, is just having great relationship with food and knowing that what food can do for us, and it's healing and, amazing. And it also, you don't have to be perfect and it shouldn't become a stressful thing. So we hope that you enjoy this episode and take a lot away from it. And if this is something that resonates with you and you're thinking like, wow, this is something that I need to look into, we'll have all of Kate's information in our show notes. And yeah, so we hope you enjoy it. Let's start the conversation. All right. Well, Kate, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Roxy and Megan. I love what you guys do, and I'm just so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, okay. So to get us started, we're going to have you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. And when doing that, like tell us a little bit about kind of the letters behind your name and what the difference between like a dietitian, nutritionist, all the different just explanations behind that. Cause I definitely know that that is something that our listeners are going to want to understand and hear about. So yeah, why don't you, just start us off with telling us a little bit about you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, my name is Kate Morgan. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I live in the Wichita, Kansas area. I've been married to my husband, Blake, for about 13 years. I don't know. When you get into the teens, you just start forgetting where we're at. I think I've also been a dietitian for 13 years. So we got married and then I passed my boards right after. We have 3 boys. I have twins who are 9. Oh. And I have a to be 7-year-old tomorrow. So Aiden will be 7. So we have 3rd graders and a 1st grader. So my life is like boy mom world, 100%. But yeah, I got into nutrition. Oh man, in undergrad, I really wanted to be a doctor. I loved health. I loved science. I am a huge cell biology nerd. And I thought, I really want to do that. And I also wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And I couldn't reconcile that when I was figuring out my life. And, it's hard to figure out your life when you're 20, right? Like, why am I making really important decisions at this age? But God like opened doors and I found nutrition and I was like, oh my gosh, I love talking about food. I love cooking. I love that. And I love helping people. And that was still kind of the core of what I wanted to do. And so I ended up getting into grad school to do my master's in nutrition. And at the time, you only had to have a bachelor's to become a dietitian. Now, as of this month, you have to have a master's to become a registered dietitian. So that just changed, kind of similar to what PT did quite a few years back. To have a doctorate, we now have to have a master's. For me, it was, I transfer schools and get a bachelor's and still spend 6 years becoming a dietitian, or I go get my master's. So I did my master's in my dietetic internship in 2 years. And that's a little bit about what makes a dietitian special and why there is actual like parameters around who can become a dietitian. You have to now have a master's degree. You also have to have a 900-hour internship that spans like 3 main categories: clinical nutrition. So that would be like hospital work. Also food service, whether it's on like a hospital food service, or if you think about your schools where if your kids go to public school, there is a food service system. They manage that. There's usually a dietitian on staff, not always. And then the other side is community. So like think WIC, women, infants, children. SNAP ed. There's a lot of different jobs in that field too. So those are kind of the three main areas that we have to do an internship in. And then we have to pass a board exam afterwards. It's pretty rigorous as well. So if you're seeing a dietitian, it's someone who's had a really solid foundation in nutrition science, biochemistry, nutritional biochemistry, which is like, I want to go back and take nutrition biochemistry in grad school again. Cause I'm like, I had nothing to apply it to back when I was studying. And so anyways, yeah, we have a very rigorous program. And so you're getting someone who has been credentialed. We have to keep up our licensure every 5 years. So that's what the RDN behind my name stands for. It's registered dietitian nutritionist. The nutritionist has been added on. So sometimes you'll just see registered dietitian. It's the same thing. LD means I'm licensed. I'm a licensed dietitian in the state of Kansas. So state by state, it depends what the requirements are. So Kansas does have licensure for dietitians to protect the people of Kansas from seeing someone who calls himself a nutritionist. So a nutritionist, anybody, you could call yourself a nutritionist, Megan or Roxy. Anybody can call themselves that. There is no protections on that name. And so if you see someone calling yourself a nutritionist, that is, like you don't necessarily know their education. They can have a high school degree and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's a sticky space.
That is good to know.
It's good to know. And a lot of people call me a dietitian or call me a nutritionist, and I usually let it slide. But sometimes I'm like, if it's a healthcare provider, I'll be like, let's actually help educate you for a moment on what that looks like. Because if you tell your patient, like, we'll just go find a nutritionist, that just opens the door for them to go find anybody. And that can be really, really dangerous because we are providing medical nutrition therapy. Which is insurance can cover that for some insurances. There's a lot of parameters around that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because that's the first time it's pretty rigorous. I mean, that's a lot of hours. And I love how you said that, where it's like, you got to be careful with that word, just nutritionist, because I know like I purchased a course because obviously like I just want to be better educated, but it's like this, it's referred to as, like a functional nutritionist certification. And I'm not going to pretend like I am any sort of like a dietitian or a nutritionist. I just wanted to know better just to like be better for my patients. And so I thought about that when I got that. I was like, boy, it's so interesting because someone could take this and really run with it. And I think that's really good for us to know. And I think we also in the PT world, there's a lot of that same sort of thing that can kind of happen that, you go take a weekend course and it's some sort of certification and it sounds all big and like special. And I think there's great people that are doing that kind of stuff, but we just need to know what the education behind that is and what the true, like being transparent of like what your training is. So that's so interesting. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point because I have background in psychology and behavior change management, and that's a whole nother layer.
Oh,
and I
totally.
think absolutely. And like health coaching is very popular right now. And I think that there are some people who do an amazing job at it. Like I had my insurance paid for a health coach one year and I was like, I got $50 if I met with it. I'm like, of course I'm going to show up to these online phone calls. Yeah. And I had no training, but he just like asked really good questions and like got me thinking. So there are definitely levels. It's just when you get into that world of I'm making recommendations like supplements. Oh, that's a whole nother hot topic.
Oh, I know.
It's you want someone who knows what they're talking about, who knows the biochemistry to educate you and to help you figure that out.
Sure. Absolutely. That's cool. Okay. What does CLT mean?
Yes. The CLT is actually a certification that I have. It's called Certified Lead Therapist. So I deal a lot in the functional space. I don't have any formal training. I read a lot. I'm actually doing a more formal gut health training starting in February. I'm really excited about. But when you're in that functional space, you get a lot of patients coming to you who are on restricted diets. Like autoimmune paleo is one that I hear a lot, or gluten dairy free for Hashimoto's, like is another one that I see commonly. But that doesn't always capture what someone is needing in that moment. Those aren't always the trigger foods. I think a lot of it comes back to gut health, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I wanted to get a better understanding of like food sensitivities. So CLT is a training that allows you to be able to interpret a test called mediator release testing, which is a specific type of food sensitivity testing. So when I have patients come to me and they're like, I did food sensitivity testing, it's usually IgG testing, which is immunoglobulin G. And what's interesting is that your body naturally releases immunoglobulin G in response to food. And it actually helps kind of your body mark that food as safe. So it's elevated IgG isn't a response to something that's causing harm in your body necessarily. It's just a normal response. But like Everlywell food sensitivity testing, I don't know if I should say that out loud, but it's IgG testing. And I'm like, you are throwing money down the drain.
Yeah.
Like if you do that kind of testing. The mediator release testing that I'm certified in looks at all of the different mediators that get released by white blood cells. So cytokines, interleukins, interferons, histamine, like there's a whole host of things that get released in response to food. Those modulators are what causes inflammation. Those are the things that can contribute to leaky gut, that can contribute to migraines. And so it allows us to test about 170 foods and see what foods are the triggers, because someone who's been told to go autoimmune paleo, like maybe red peppers aren't a problem.
Sure.
Maybe it's something really random, like apples. I swear apples pop up all the time on people when I don't do this very often. It's an expense, and it's also a very targeted test. So anyways, I decided I wanted to become better knowledgeable about that. So I did that testing a couple of years ago and got that certification. So
that's awesome.
I use it sparingly, but it's helpful to have in my back pocket for people who need it. And prevent someone from being on a more restricted diet in the long term. And that's always my goal. Like we've talked about before, Megan, like least restrictive diet possible so that we can nourish our body and also just live our life and not stress about food a lot. Because stress is going to have a whole nother impact on our health too.
I was talking about that when I was sharing about how we met and where I was in my headspace and when I did those years of AIP and the stress that it caused. And when you talk about the restricted diet, I remember I did early on a food sensitivity test, and I'm pretty sure it was what you were speaking about. And I mean, there were some things that came back on it that, it was like raspberries, and I'm like, wait a second. And I think I had pork on there. Well, I had just been eating at the time too. I was like in this phase of, I was so restricted, but like meat was okay. And so I was eating a lot of that. And so then I found out that, it could have shown up just because like I had higher levels of eating pork. And I didn't actually need to completely cut it from my diet and make it more restrictive. And I was more stressed. So I think like, gosh, this is just such a good conversation because we kind of talked a little bit about like nutrition and social media and all the stuff. Like we are driven by so much right now of what we see. And it's like, oh, take this test and learn that. Well, it could be no purpose.
Right. I love capturing people. I love it when I get someone who's like, I have lots of questions and they're willing to like listen. And I have the time. Like their doctors don't have the time. Like that's my job is I get to sit and help you sift through all of the different things that are going on and help you figure out what's the next best step that we can do to help get you a little bit more information and get you feeling better. And sometimes it's not the crazy expensive functional medicine testing. Like sometimes we don't need to do the stool test. Sometimes we don't need to do the food sensitivity test. Maybe we just need to like work on the foundations of like actually eating.
Yes.
And eating balanced meals.
I was like, step one, just eat.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
So cool.
Well, Kate, tell us a little bit then, like, what does it look like to work with you and how, if we look into like gut health and stress and all that, like kind of give us a picture of how you help us, right? So, I mean, you definitely do, right? We just heard all the qualifications that you have, but help us understand gut health and microbiome and, like all of that and what we can do for all that or what you can do for all that and we can help ourselves with.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I work one-on-one. I mostly work in the telehealth space right now, seeing clients. And so when I get clients coming to me, it's typically another type of complaint. Like sometimes gut health is top of mind, but it's usually like, I have high cholesterol, or I have prediabetes, or I'm wanting to get pregnant and I'm struggling with infertility. And as we talk, I'm always doing an evaluation. Like we are talking about whole body systems. How's your sleep? How's your stress? what are you eating? What's your medical care been like over the last couple of years? Are you on birth control? Because you might have some nutritional deficiencies from that long term. And then also, what's digestion look like? I think this is my only claim to fame because my boys don't really know what I do. They're like, Mom, kind of like a doctor. And she talks about poop a lot.
Sounds like us too.
I know. I just was like, man, I think we are also asking all these things, and I love it that there's more providers that are, or like there's all of us in our different places are asking those questions.
And there's
so
like
I love
a
that.
different, I feel like there's different purposes of like, we all are asking that same question and we all have a different like lens of why we're asking it, which is really cool. And also how you mentioned too, like, yes, in our normal healthcare system, sometimes we only get 15 minutes with our doctor, and how you said, like, you have time. And that's same, I feel like for us to where when we're seeing these people for a long period of time, we're catching things that maybe would be overlooked. And then that's where we then can refer out and be like, there is something going on here. And then that's where I love like what you do, which I think is overlooked a lot in the team of like when you're doing your wellness and you're thinking about who should I see, especially with the background and all the training that you have to be able to not only talk about food, which is super important, but supplementation and get guidance on, well, what tests should we do? Like you said, sometimes it's like, let's just not even do any right now. Like, let's just do the basic, like you said, like sleep. Number one, sleep and poop.
Yes. Yes. Let's get those bowels moving. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm always assessing like, what does digestion look like?
Yeah.
I see a lot of acid reflux. I see a lot of heartburn. I think it all comes back to like foundations. And that's the word I usually use with my clients when I first meet with them. I'm doing this assessment. And while I'm talking to them, I'm like, while you're talking and answering my questions, I'm building out a plan. And I am building out like, these are the things that I want to work on. And at the end of our first session, I'm reflecting that back to my patients. Here's where I feel like I can be helpful for you. And here's how I feel like I can meet with what I'm hearing you want. But here's also, I'm the navigation system in the car. You're driving the car. I'm the navigation, and you can like choose to turn me off. You can choose to like listen to me. You can ask me for recommendations. Like, I want this to be a partnership, and you're also coming to me because you want my expertise. And there's a part of you that recognizes I don't quite know how to do this on my own. So from that, I go first session, I'm like, we're building the foundations. And a lot of that is, let's eat breakfast. let's eat regular meals. Let's like talk about what that looks like. Cause I think a lot of people, they're inundated. Like we said earlier, social media.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be more on my Instagram sharing in that I was a stay-at-home mom for 8 years. And so that was kind of my space to still have a foot in the door and still like engage. I had a lot of friends in Colorado when we lived there who were always asking me questions. So I'm like, okay, I'll do an Instagram and I'll just talk about this from time to time. And now I've really pulled back in this last year as I've been working full time again, because I feel like sometimes there's so much nuance. And that's kind of the word I use a lot with clients is nutrition is nuanced. What works for you isn't necessarily going to work for someone else. And like, your friend did this crazy diet and saw great success, or they cut this out, they felt better. That doesn't mean that's going to work for you. Like we need to get to know each other, and I need to figure out what's the nuanced approach that's going to help you best. And social media, I think, drives this one size fits all sometimes approach to nutrition, and it just muddies the waters in a way that is really hard, which is why I don't share as much on there anymore. Cause I'm like, well, this could be true for that person, but would that be true for you? And I'm like, it's just, there's so much nuance to it that it's hard to even convey that in an Instagram post or even in a reel. Yeah.
I think that we kind of experience that same thing sometimes when we see stuff. It's like, well, that might work for you, but maybe not somebody else. And so it takes me back when you're talking about that is like when intermittent fasting became like such a thing, and it may make some people feel great, but it also may make some people feel awful. But then there's all this pressure where they're like, well, they say it's healthy to do, so I need to keep doing it. I mean, that was me. I mean, I was like, oh, they say to do this, like, okay. And I felt awful, like anxiety attacks, and my heart rate was up, and I had headaches, and I felt faint, and like all the things. And then it's like, oh, that's not how you're supposed to feel with it. And maybe that's just not for me. And that was kind of like, early on and before I had my autoimmune diagnosis and all that stuff. And knowing now why my body did, like, that's not what my body needed. And so I think that it's so fascinating, especially with social media now, how people, I mean, we're just able to share so much information, which is sometimes good, but also can be very harmful. I wanted to circle back to when you talked about breakfast, because this was something that you and I talk about all the time. And I think this is maybe an important thing to touch on, because I know I'm not alone in the fact that a lot of women wake up in the morning and they don't have an appetite to eat, or they might feel a little like their stomach is, they're just like, ugh. And kind of talk into that of kind of what you and I talked about, how that's not a good thing, and cortisol and stress hormone, like all of that, because I think that was something, and it's still something I work on, that I think a lot of people need to hear, because so many, especially women, are, I know, feeling the same way.
Absolutely. So like I said, I had 3 kids in 2 years, and I quickly learned how to not eat breakfast
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was chaos. And I was breastfeeding and I just didn't sleep. And I'm like, I don't know how I survived. I survived. I'm alive.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're spot on in that. I get a lot of people that are like, well, I'm not hungry. And we've been told, I think diet culture and just culture in general is like, well, if you're not hungry, don't eat. And with time, that starts to get suppressed. And so what I find is, intermittent fasting, that the research is really interesting, especially for women. I'll say I see men who also are having negative implications of this as well. But, our hormones are more touchy. We're a little bit more responsive to, like, are we eating adequately? Are we getting adequate enough fat intake? And what I see happen is, okay, you're going to bed, 10 to midnight, runs the range. That's usually what I see a lot of my clients go to bed. And then you're not eating that whole time, right? In your body, that's normal. That's important. We want to have a window of time where we're not eating. That there's benefit there. But a lot of times intermittent fasting and like time restricted eating, I'll define that with clients. Like, time restricted eating is maybe we just don't eat like after 7 o'clock, and then at 7 we're ready to eat again. But a lot of people just don't know where this got mixed. They'll go, oh, I'm not going to eat till noon.
Yeah.
And then what happens is afternoon hits and they're like, why am I so tired? Why am I craving all of the sugar? Why do I only want to eat carbs? And then, or after night, like after bedtime, like the kids go to bed, they're like finally relaxed and their body's like, hi, I haven't eaten enough all day.
Yes.
And I want ice cream. Which ice cream's great. I love it. But it's like,
Yeah.
it drives these cravings, and it almost like binge-like behavior for some people. Because,
Yeah.
and I am able to say, what about if you ate breakfast? How would you feel? And your body needs like a set amount of nutrition every day. Like, I'll educate on basal metabolic rate. Like, what do you need to be in a coma? And a lot of people are eating right at that or less. And I'm like, well, no wonder we're tired.
Wow.
We're cranky. We are not losing weight like we want to be. Our metabolism is all off. And you've already been fasting all night. So why do we need to keep fasting? And work on that. And then eventually we can talk about how eating late at night is probably what drives more of the problems. And where the research really shows time restricted eating is helpful is like being done in the evening versus like keep snacking. And so we're just like flipping it on its head, but helping them understand that. And then problem solving. How do we get through the breakfast icks? Like we worked on with you, Megan.
Yes.
Like, how do we get through this? Like, I'm not hungry. And chrononutrition is like, I have an article I need to republish. I used to publish a newsletter and it was in my newsletter. I need to like actually put it online. I spent 2 hours last night building a new website because I'm like, I need to have somewhere to send people after we do this. I know it'll be a while before it's published, but I'm like, I need to publish some of these things. But chrononutrition is fascinating because your hunger is typically greatest at night and lowest in the morning. And it's almost an inverse of when we need to be eating. We need more food in the day because you're about to go work, chase your kids, drive a car. Like, let's please have some food in your body before you go drive a car in the morning. You're going to go do all these things. You need energy. And if we are skipping breakfast, like, you can kind of see why we end up where we end up. So I spend a lot of time just, what are those simple things? And maybe it's, we come up with a breakfast that is exciting. Maybe it's just we eat some fruit. Maybe we do have that half a bagel, which, you've been told forever carbs are bad and we shouldn't eat them. But that's the one thing that sounds good in the morning. Let's do a pre-breakfast. Let's pre-breakfast it and have a little bit of a bagel with some cream cheese or some peanut butter, and then have a little bit more substantial breakfast 30 minutes later when we get the nausea out of the way. And so that's a lot of what I do is just
I love
problem
that.
solving.
And also knowing like that's okay. I mean, I know if that was for me, like coming from I like to say that I'm always trying to like, I have tendencies of like this perfectionistic, and it really came back out when I opened the clinic. But it was almost like I just needed somebody to tell me like that was okay, because for so long I was like told like carbs, don't eat carbs. Well, for my particular body and what I was going through and my adrenals and all the stuff, that's what felt good. And it was when you said to me like, yeah, I bet your body really likes that. That's what it wants and needs. And I was like, yeah, this is great. So like now it's like avocado toast. I have it right here sitting with me, and yeah, it's I just love it. I just hope that so many people get so much out of this, that like debunking some of these myths that have been fed to us that are absolutely just ridiculous. So
Well, and I guess I didn't realize too, when you were talking about how our body it'll suppress that.
yeah.
Cause I've kind of just busy mom right now. Like I catch myself like, oh, I didn't even eat lunch. Like I wasn't even hungry. And the old me would be ravenous at lunch, And so I'm like, what's even wrong with me right now? Or like, how did I just skip lunch and not even think twice about it? Like, what's happening? And just even the fact that you said like, our body will learn to suppress that, just has got me thinking a little more personally, but just that idea of, man, I used to not function. I used to be hangry, if I didn't eat or whatever. And sometimes now I'm like, oh, I should probably eat, I guess. Like,
So just like, what's overriding that? A little bit of stress.
yeah.
Yeah, and stress is a huge like appetite suppressant. And, and sometimes it's like coffee, like we're drinking tons of coffee. I love coffee. I love tea, but caffeine has that, appetite suppressant sometimes for some people. Everybody's a little different, but it's kind of what we thrive on when we're in like tired mom life. And, we've got a million coffee shops. I live in Goddard, and we have 4 coffee shops now.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Don't you guys have isn't there there's one that I think I follow that is like super, which one do you have a favorite?
I don't know if I can say it's this tiny town. I'm like on the library board. If I say things like that, I'll get in trouble.
Okay, we can't say that. Okay, well just like what's the 4 coffee shops in Goddard?
So we have Starbucks and Scooters now.
Okay,
Those are like corporate. And then we
Okay.
have Co-Fellow, which is locally owned, and it's downtown.
Okay.
And then we have Rusted Bean, which is a drive-through that just opened up.
I think it was the 2 local ones that I have like kind of been following. And I think it's so fun, like shout out to go get coffee locally. But yeah, I think that what you said, I know we're talking mostly like women, but as we talk about men too, my husband, I mean, it's just a conversation we've been having because he for a long time was like long intermittent fasting. And it's interesting because he's in this state right now where it's shifted, where it's not serving him as well. And he was really used to just like, the joke is like everybody at school knows he just has coffee all the time. Like all he does is coffee. And guess what? Now it's not serving him well. And he comes home, he's just like toasted and has no energy. And I'm like, it's because you're not eating and you need to schedule an appointment with Kate.
So I want to kind of talk about what I've seen in practice with like men who intermittent fast. I see a lot of gut health problems kind of pop up. And so I think sometimes it's intentional intermittent fasting. I think sometimes it's also just like busy lifestyles that we just, again, we're not hungry. We don't eat. Why would I eat breakfast? Because I've heard that's not important. It's the same similar kind of reasonings, I think just a little bit different. But what I see more with men is less the like lack of energy. And I see it become more of like, we start to have a lot of digestive problems. So we have a lot more heartburn, acid reflux. We start to just have a lot of like just GI pain. And they're like, I don't know what's going on, or they can't digest protein anymore. I think this is what always I find gets men is they're like, I can't eat steak anymore. Like, what's wrong with me? Or my protein drink, I can't tolerate it anymore, my whey protein. And so what we start to figure out is like, okay, well, we need to start eating a little bit more. I find they also tend to be a little bit less on the fruits and vegetables. I think it's always something we'll talk about that maybe here in a minute about why that's actually really important. I think people know, like we all know we need to eat more of those, but why? We'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But what we see is when you're not eating adequately throughout the day, and this is true for men and women, this is true for humans, right? If we're not eating adequately in the day, if we're under consuming nutrients, we're going to start to get those nutrients from our body. And we're going to start to break down different areas in our body. And one of the first places we do that is in our gut. if we're not eating enough, if we're not nourishing our body enough with the right vitamins, minerals, also macronutrients like protein, carbs, fat, we're going to start to see those negative implications show up in our gut health. And so we start to see decreased stomach acid production. So sometimes acid reflux is actually a result of hypochlorhydria, which is like low stomach acid. And that low stomach acid starts to suppress the ability of the rest of your body. So when stomach acid is released from your stomach and with food, so that chyme mixture that gets released, that helps trigger that downstream cascade of like bile acid getting released from your gallbladder and other digestive enzymes getting released from your pancreas. And so when we don't have adequate stomach acid, that doesn't happen as well. And then what we see downstream is that high acidic environment helps keep gut bacteria in check, helps keep things from overgrowing. And if we don't have enough stomach acid, we don't have enough digestive enzymes, we start to not digest food as well. We start to also see an overgrowth of bacteria. And so it becomes this like hamster wheel that we can't get out of because we have low stomach acid. So we lack digestive enzymes. So we're not breaking down food. So we have bloating, cramping, we have sometimes constipation, sometimes diarrhea. It just depends on the person. You guys deal a lot with like that side of things with pelvic floor. And I'm always telling people, I'm like, have you seen a pelvic floor therapist yet for especially for the constipation?
Yeah.
But a lot of it comes back to we're not giving our body the building blocks it needs to be able to digest food well and to make the things we need to digest food well. And so it usually involves coming back to like the basics, the foundations, like I was saying, eating regular meals, getting in adequate amounts of protein. I think sometimes that's easier for others than not. And there's a lot of controversy right now in the nutrition space on like, what's the right amount of protein? And that's the nuance. That's where it's like, I can't really tell you like there's this golden number you need to hit. It just depends on what works for you. So that's kind of where we focus on is looking at like gut health. And there's a lot we can typically do without going into more like dedicated gut testing. But I do run a test called GI map fairly frequently on patients. And it's a PCR test that looks at the different types of bacteria in your stool. It also looks at parasites. It looks at worms, which thankfully no one's popped up with any of those.
So
I'm just
crazy.
like, really? Do we have those? We can. Yeah. But it also looks at H. pylori and like, what are those levels looking like as well? And what I like to do with patients, like before we go to testing, it's still coming back to the basics. And what I'd love to educate on is like, why fruits and veggies are so important. And if I was to say that to both of you, like, what would you guys say? Why are fruits and veggies so important for your health in general?
Fiber.
Let me put you on the spot.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, I was going to say fiber and then just like those, like, well, I don't even know if I'm going to say it right. Like micro, macronutrients of just like the little thing are important.
And why is fiber important? I love putting people on the spot.
Oh my gosh. I know. And I love this because I'm like, I don't really know. I just tell people it's important. No.
To digest.
To digest.
Help with digestion.
Like, help with your stools. We know it helps like bulk the stool.
Yeah, it helps bulk. And I think this is the classic answer that I get. And so I love starting here and being like, let's take it a level deeper. Let's like help you understand why this really matters.
God, I love this stuff. Yes. Keep on going.
I know I could nerd out all day, like I said. So fiber is definitely part of it. And we have two types of fiber, right? We have soluble fiber, which does like raise blood sugar. It does get absorbed some by the body. We also have insoluble fiber. That's the type of fiber that we're talking about that more helps bulk up stool, helps pull water into the colon so that we have better bowel movements. But fiber also is food for your gut bacteria. So I love to talk about this. So fiber is one part of the puzzle. Then we also get the antioxidants and polyphenols that we get from fruits and vegetables. So when we say eat the rainbow, that's the piece that provides the antioxidants, the polyphenols. And without going into like super truly nerdy biochemistry, my husband teaches chemistry and he thinks I don't know any chemistry. So it's really funny to talk about this. I'm like, don't listen to this episode, honey. But those polyphenols and antioxidants also are really helpful at boosting different types of microbiome colonies in your gut. And what they do is, and it's kind of gross to think about it, but they digest those things and then they excrete substances that your body needs that we cannot get from food. So if you've ever heard of butyrate, it's a short chain fatty acid. Have you guys heard of butyrate at all before?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So butyrate is a short chain fatty acid that's actually pretty difficult to get from our diet. Like we are not necessarily going to see it often in diet. We see it some from like grass-fed dairy has some butyrate in it, but it's still very small compared to the amount that your gut is supposed to produce for you. Your gut microbiome is supposed to produce for you. And that's just one short chain fatty acid. There's a whole host of short chain fatty acids that are produced by your gut microbiome. And those in turn have like important immune modulating benefits to help with your immune system. So as we see like in people who have autoimmune conditions, they tend to have low flora that are beneficial producers for like butyrate. One of the tests that I run kind of looks at that a little bit, but we need to eat the colors. We need to eat various forms of fiber and high fiber to help support good gut health. And one of the things that's challenging in this is that I see a lot of people who have like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because they've just got a plethora of bacteria. They've got a lot of gas and bloating. They're really painful. Do you guys see SIBO at all, that diagnosis? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or at least people that were like, maybe you need to go. But, then again, it's like we might catch that. But if their primary care doctor isn't really versed in it, it's hard to find people which, not to stop you, but I was going to ask you when you talk about like the test you like to run. So just so our listeners know, like if you order that test, can they go and get that from like a LabCorp place, or do they have to go to their doctor and ask for it? Like, are you able to run that, like order those?
So in the state of Kansas, I can't order labs and I can't order the stool test. It ships straight to your house. You do a stool sample, you mail it in, and then I get the results, and then we go over the results. So
cool.
You can get like a super bill for insurance to potentially cover it. I've actually heard Medicare covers it, which is interesting.
That's interesting.
If you want insurance to cover anything for testing, your doctor has to order it, not your dietitian.
Yeah.
So there's I can still order it. You're just going to pay out of pocket. I don't usually upcharge for testing, or I build it in. It depends on where I'm seeing you with, like through who, whether it's through myself or through my other company that I work through.
Cool. Okay. Good for us to know.
It does allow us to look at SIBO because you're right. Some providers will recognize it. And I have some gastroenterologists who are like, that doesn't exist.
I know.
Or it falls under like IBS, just like we're just going to call it IBS. Like,
yes.
Right.
We get a lot. I feel like it's like people are being like, you got colitis, you got IBS, or, and it's like they've got this terrible stomach pain. And it's like, okay, well, like, even if you do, like, but why? Like, let's go, we need to figure out deeper. Okay. So let's circle back. You're talking about SIBO. And then we kind of cut off there, but I want to make sure that we get back to that and you kind of finish that. But yeah, so like, yes. Okay.
Yeah. So we see a lot of like, if we have this overgrowth, throwing more prebiotics like fiber, antioxidants, that can also make it worse because you're just giving more fuel to the fire that's raging inside. And so one thing that we kind of look at is a low FODMAP diet is commonly prescribed. And I think it's commonly prescribed in the last 5 years. I also see a lot of patients who have been on it for years, and it was meant to be a 6-week protocol while you do like antibiotics to treat the SIBO, or you do an antimicrobial. Like I can't do antibiotics. I'm not allowed to prescribe those, but I can prescribe antimicrobials like berberine, oil of oregano, biocidin, or some of the common ones that I use. You don't want to use those unless you're under the supervision of a dietitian. I can prescribe those kinds of things. I don't think your scope of practice, you guys can't do supplement recommendations, right? Yeah.
We give, I would say we give suggestions. Like these are, like magnesium is like a huge one for us, or like electrolyte. Like we're very much, it's like the very basic broad, but we're never going into basically what you just said. All of those things, I would have no clue, I'm like,
yeah. And it's hard because we can talk about supplements in a minute. I do want to talk about that at some point if we have time, but yeah, that's kind of how I would look at it is, we can do a low FODMAP and it is low fiber. But what I see is people who stay on those low FODMAP diets for SIBO long-term, like you're going to start killing off all good gut bacteria because you no longer have the things that they need to thrive. And so that's again, where there's this miscommunication, I think sometimes between providers and patients where they're like, well, go do this and I'll see you in 6 months. And you're like, oh gosh, please send them to a dietitian so we can work through some of that because we want your gut health to function and thrive. But there's, again, a lot of nuance involved in it and figuring out how to make that work for you. And so, yeah, I'm always asking like fruits and veggies. And I think the more I do this, the more I'm like, I need to eat fruits and veggies. Like,
I know.
I need to add in more of these things to my diet too. So I drink a lot more green tea now. I drink a lot more green tea than I ever used to. The more I learn about, the more GI maps I'm doing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to take care of myself better.
I'm like,
yeah.
okay, write down, Megan, drink more green tea. Like I'm taking notes myself. Well, and obviously you and I have talked and I know for myself, sometimes when I get given like, well, you should do this or this, it really does help when we know them more in depth as to why. I know that for sure that helps me. And sometimes I need to circle back. Like I forget things. Like I've had providers be like, "Do you remember why we're doing this?" I'm like, "You know what? No, I don't, because it was years ago when we started taking that supplement and now I've stopped taking it. Why are we doing that?" So I think this is super helpful. And I don't know if you've watched yet this new docuseries on Netflix, You Are What You Eat. Have you watched it yet? And it's like they look at twins and it's like omnivore versus, and I was just like, they talk a little bit about gut health on it and fruits and vegetables and what it does to help our gut biome, and I had a moment where I was like, oh yeah. So I went and made, like you said, I cooked the rainbow on Sunday. I like made a whole sheet of
all the things.
So
yes. Yeah. And it can feel really overwhelming when you're like told just like eat more fruits and veggies. And you're like, well,
why?
How do I do that?
Yeah.
And that's what I do session by session. We're like, what could we add this in here? Like berries at breakfast are such an easy, and I know we live in Kansas, people listening elsewhere, it might be a little bit easier to get fresher things more often, but there are ways around it. And I'm here to help brainstorm. How do we make that work? How do we make that actually happen? And I forgot a really cool stat about the gut microbiome that I heard. And I did a training with the company that does GI Map, and they were talking about how the amount of like nutritional processes that your gut microbiome do is almost equal to the processes that your liver does for your health.
Wow.
So like if you think about all your liver does for you and how you need that, like your gut microbiome is almost on the equal playing field of like what it can do for your health and for your overall well-being. And so also quantifying that for patients, they're like mind blown and like, oh, that is important. Then I probably should work on figuring this out a little bit more.
Yeah. So fascinating. Well, and I don't know if, as we're talking about gut biome, but I know like I've just in some of the stuff that I've been at is how like vaginal health and gut health seem to like they like almost the vaginal health is mimicked by gut health. So if you have like a whole bunch of stuff going on like in your gut, you might notice things like yeast infections or irritation or stuff like that. So if we, in a roundabout way, like all the stuff you're talking about is important to us in the public health space. But even if we go more specifically to just vaginal health, because we do get so many women that say like, I feel like I have a yeast infection all the time, but then I get tested and I don't. And then like we see a lot of your current UTIs, which we see that a lot with like low estrogen, or it's a mimic. It feels like you have a UTI, but you don't. But all in all, it all comes kind of back to, like we're addressing like muscle and nervous system and all of that. But when we layer in also too of like how much nutrition and even sleep and how much that plays a role into, I mean, you can't have a happy gut and a happy gut biome if we're running on fumes. So it is so fascinating how it all is so connected. And if you start on your health journey, if you're true, you really can't avoid it. Like you need to address these things or you're only superficially like addressing. You're not getting to root cause.
Right. Exactly. And I think a lot of times like with the food sensitivities, it's like, well, those are probably happening in the presence of gut dysbiosis. They're probably happening in like leaky gut is occurring because of this inflammation that we've got from overgrowth or lack of good gut bugs, whatever is going on down there. But yeah, I absolutely see that help like vaginal health, interstitial cystitis.
Yeah.
There's a lot of connections there as well. Absolutely. For sure.
And I know like with our IC patients, like early in their diagnosis, like the first thing they're kind of led to is like, you need to figure out what foods you're sensitive to. And you need to, and again, it's very overwhelming. And research is showing that sometimes that's not, I mean, we know in the pelvic health space, gosh, you got this little bladder housed with all these muscles around it. And if you've got this pain, it causes tension. And again, then that causes more stress because it's kind of like what happened with me when I was on AIP. It's like you have all this stress of if I eat the wrong thing, it's going to cause my symptoms to get worse. And then that stress drives more inflammation. And then the pain. I mean, the point of saying all that is to get a provider in there that is well educated on basically kind of like what you do to be able to like chill everything out. Just take it one step at a time. Because living in this life of all or nothing doesn't work.
No, I think you bring up such a good piece that I forgot to talk about was, and I think you guys talk up. I've been seeing a physical therapist locally for a long time for like neck stuff. And we talk about vagal nerve and digestion and all of this, but that's something that I'm always is top of mind too. It's just like food hygiene. Like I think a lot of times it's so simple. And sometimes it's like we don't even need to look at all of that yet until we talk about like, are we breathing before? You know, are we like having a moment of gratitude or prayer that we're just like, this is time to eat. Like, let's put the phone away. Let's get away from the television. Let's sit down with our family if we're able, if we have people to sit with and share a meal with. Let's activate that vagal nerve, whether it's through some deep breathing, through humming, through gargling. You know, there's all these different tools in our toolbox. But like that, I think I had a client I worked with for, I'm not kidding, 6 months. And I kept being like, yeah, I think this might still be really helpful. She finally did it. And she's like, I didn't believe you. And then I did it. I was like, what just happened? Like the pain, her stomach pain decreased. She felt better. She was able to eat and not have as much pain. And it was like, just that simple little thing. And sometimes it just takes a while to really think can it be this simple?
Yeah.
But it really can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Gosh, I know. I think there'd probably be a whole episode on vagal nerve stuff. And a part of it is getting individuals to try it and really understand the power behind that and the breath work. And I loved what you said about like sitting down. And if you have people to sit with them and just like, even if it's your own family, but it's like community and sitting next. Roxanne we talked one of our episodes about how like when you're walking with somebody and you're walking side by side with them and what that can do. And I know you and I had talked about back in the day, everybody'd sit down for breakfast. Like we'd all sit down. And it was something I was going to try to do with my own family of like one day a week, we're going to sit down. We still haven't done it, but it does bring you back to like, yeah, it's always on the go. Like it's always on the go. And just like having that gratitude of what the food is doing for you. And it's so good.
So this concludes our part 1 of a 2-part series with Kate Morgan. And we really are excited about the second part of this conversation. So join us on our next episode where we dive into some really specific questions with her. And she gives us really good education on not just the general idea of diet and nutrition and healthy living, but some real nitty gritty specific details on how to approach certain topics that we all are wondering about. So join us next episode.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.